and welcome to Mapping the College Audition. I'm your host, Charlie Murphy, director of MTCA. That's Musical Theater College Auditions. Check us out at mtca.com. And today we have got Brad Willcuts from Michigan State University on the pod. For our newer listeners, this is another one of our college deep dive episodes where we explore the landscape of the college theater world and try to demystify this daunting audition process. And yes, we are having a very Michigan moment on the pod. Don't know what to say. This was not something that was intentional in our scheduling. We always reach out to like a bunch of schools at once and we schedule far in advance. Often we literally schedule like many months ahead. It just so happened with the schools that came back and the way it lined up, and then we had a school cancel, that we just ended up with Michigan after Michigan after Michigan. We had Western Michigan, Oakland, Michigan State. And then our next interview will be Act 3 with the University of Michigan, a really fun pod that I just recorded as we speak. So I promise our school after that will not be a Michigan episode. I will say it is going to be a much anticipated Ohio-based episode to finish off this season of Mapping the College Audition. And then no more Michigan-based schools in 2025. I promise. Probably. We'll see. But yes, as we mentioned earlier, we are gearing up for a bit of a wind down and a break for a few weeks, just a few short weeks of podcast break, though there'll be still stuff dropping in your feed that I'll get into a little bit. And then we'll hit the ground running again with new schools in August. I hope you all are out there planning your summers out with some intentionality as well, both in terms of like what you want to accomplish and also where you're going to find those elements of break in it all. I'm going to try to enjoy my break. I'll say that for sure. We all need that rest and recovery. But then, of course, for our rising seniors, we also know that the more that you can accomplish during your summer, the more you're going to set yourself up for a successful senior year. So like so many things we talk about in the pod, it is a balancing act. Can you find that element of rest? Can you find that recuperation? But can you also try to get a lot done? I hope at least you guys are engaging with our monthly webinars during the summer. It's a great way to kind of stay locked in, even if you are intentionally checking out at some moments. Nothing wrong with that. I think it can be healthy. But are you kind of staying locked in and staying part of the process? I highly recommend it if you can. I'm keeping the intro and outro a bit shorter for this episode today because we're trying to make that school pick up. I always say it, but this time it's going to be true. Short intro and short outro. I believe in us. So I'm just going to toss it without further ado to this interview with Bradley Willcuts from Michigan State University. Well, we are so excited to be joined by Brad Willcuts. Brad has a BA from Minnesota State University and MFA in Theater Performance Pedagogy from Virginia Commonwealth University. He's an actor, director, choreographer, and especially fight choreographer. Has done some cool Broadway stuff and stuff with the Metropolitan Opera. And Brad is currently an associate professor of musical theater and choreography at Michigan State University, where he also serves as the head of acting. Michigan State is located in East Lansing, Michigan. They have a BFA in acting with an MT minor. We'll get into all the specifics. They also offer a BA in theater, and they take about 12 to 16 in that BFA acting portion, and we'll talk about the specifics of the MT minor. Brad, welcome on the pod. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Brad, let's just tell me a little about your journey in terms of, I gave just that brief overview. What do people need to know about you in terms of your journey to the school and your relationship with the school?
Yeah, so I started out as a performer from a very young age, and musical theater was really important in my life. Started at 9 years old, and went to college for it, as you said, with a BA at Minnesota State. The reason I chose Minnesota State, originally from Washington, is because they did like 12 to 16 productions a year. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that if I went there, I was just going to get training. And that's just kind of my jam. I want to be working constantly. And so once I left there, I moved immediately to New York, started working. Both of my parents are teachers, so I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to be able to have like a decent resume so that when I did eventually become a teacher, that I knew that I was invested into the industry and the professional world of musical theater. I was a singing waiter at Ellen Stardust Diner. I did chorus line like 5 times, actor, singer, dancer person. Yep. And so then when I found the MFA at Virginia Commonwealth, it's focused primarily on pedagogy. So their entire focus point is to teach people how to work in higher ed. And Michigan State came a calling, and it's a Research One university, which basically means that the people who were hired on faculty split their role percentage-wise between an equal amount of creative activity and an equal amount of teaching. So when I'm here, obviously I teach classes, but when I'm not here, I'm working on professional shows all the
Yep.
time. And that's what you mentioned in my bio.
And what about the sort of turn to fight and movement choreography? Sort of how did that come about for you?
Well, I've always been an athlete and I've always been a mover. I mean, with the dance minor, dance and movement and fights just come naturally to me. And so I had a mentor at VCU who's a 20-time Broadway fight director named David Leong, and his wife Patty DeBeck, who's an old Broadway veteran. And so I started realizing within about 5 minutes that fights came supernaturally to me. And it's also a great way to diversify yourself because,
Mhm.
yes, I can teach acting, I can teach dance, I can teach singing. But if I can also have combat, contemporary violence, intimacy involved in that, I'm trying to round myself out as like an artist that can be kind of pliable in all areas of performance, specifically with movement in mind.
I love it. Yeah, I'm knowing a lot of fight choreographers. I'm not sure that they always come from the dance world. It certainly makes intuitive sense, but I do think a lot of like fight choreographers maybe come from the non-musical theater world in the
Absolutely
sort of
right.
the broier version of the fight choreography as
You are
opposed to yeah.
absolutely right, and that is absolutely not necessarily my game. Like I am, I think as musical theater people, I really hold musical theater in the highest regard of an art form,
Mhm.
and truly believe that strong musical theater directors and strong musical theater actors can do almost anything.
Mhm.
So when I approach fights, I also have a background in it because I'm not sitting there being like, "This is the martial way to do it." I'm like, "Well, what tells the best story visually
Uh-huh.
on stage?"
So well said. All right, cool. Let's get into Michigan State a little bit. So, you mentioned the Research One University. I love that, and we'll talk a little bit more about the academics. But let's just kind of talk about the students as a whole. As as you sort of look at your university and other universities, like what do you think it means to be a Michigan State University student? Like, what is the ethos? What is the personality? What is the vibe of a Michigan State student?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, it is the very first land grant university in the country, established in the 1860s. So it is the very first university that the government said, we are going to grant this land specifically for this university.
Hmm.
And it became an agricultural college. And since then, it's grown. And so the college itself like feels like this gothic landmark. It has one of the most beautiful park-like campuses you can
Hmm.
imagine. It has the longest history of any land grant, obviously, any land grant university in the country. And so there's a lot of history here, and it's massive. I mean, you're looking at upwards of like 50,000 students
Uh huh.
like populating the college. And however, the theater department and the art department and some of the smaller areas inside the College of Arts and Letters are relatively small. And so the benefit that you have is that you get to be in more of an intimate college like you might see at a smaller liberal arts place, but you get the resources of this massive, like huge city, basically.
Hmm.
And so we have a lot of students who are able to do incredible grants and travel abroad opportunities, connecting their majors of study, if it isn't theater, to their musical theater minor and dance minor, etc. So your average student here is really looking for that really stereotypical kind of collegiate sports gothic campus environment. But then we get really specific and kind of like codified into our small department.
Hmm. And I'd love to talk specifically about the BFA actors with the MT minor, and then also want to talk about the BFA actors without the MT minor. But the BFA actors with the MT minor, how much, I guess, how much do those students feel like sort of stereotypical MTs? Like, is it basically a version of patching together an MT degree, or does it feel like an acting degree with an MT add-on? Like, in terms of the experience of what those humans are they like what you would think of as like your stereotypical MTs, or are they actors who are MT curious? Or how would you describe most of those MT minor folks?
Yeah, so I know there's a lot of schools out there that like to have their kind of brand. If I had to choose a brand for us, I would say that we are absolutely w- super hyper focused in acting. Our BFA has a really robust 10 faculty acting cadre of people, and we have a really high caliber and quite difficult and rigorous acting. I call it the kind of the root of the tree is really
Mm-hmm.
where it is. And then those who are interested in MT acting are going to get those skill-based classes that they can get with dance and with voice classes, private, etc. But we are absolutely like invested primarily in the actor first.
Yep.
And so your average person who is like a BFA MT person is really going to be, and in the course curriculum in musical theater really reflects our dedication towards acting. I truly believe personally, and I know that a lot of my colleagues share this, that acting is paramount in musical theater. Um, and that's just a belief that we share specifically. And so that's really where our focus point is,
Yep.
and we share various acting techniques within the course. But that's kind of where if I had to brand it, that's what I would say.
Great, and I want to get a little bit more into those specific curricular elements, but first, you mentioned in the top that the idea of the MT minor, not all of the MT minors are BFA actors. So how does that work in terms of your split of who are the BFA actors with the MT minors, and then the other students with the MT minors?
Yeah, so anything obviously with an FA before it is going to be audition only for us. And so
Yep.
the BFA is audition only, and the musical theater minor is one of very few minors on campus that is audition only.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, the we're really trying to find the right person. So within our audition process, now I might be going on to a question that you have later,
Just
but
look
I'm
for it.
just going to keep going with it. We ask for, a handful of songs, but one of the most important factors that we do both in the BFA and in the MT section is we ask for videos describing who they are, why are they interested in this. Even in the dance minor too, we're looking for people who have an interesting kind of life already, or a passion towards new entrepreneurial work. We're dedicated towards the future of theater, and I'll get into this later. But we have a lot of like high tech, future forward thinking classes, and so for us, it's the person and the student who is really interested in sharing the responsibility of their education with us.
Yep.
It's not a class where it's like check, 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 skill, skill, skill. It's now we know who you are. Let's share the responsibility of your education. And so we want those kind of students who are curious. I
Mm-hmm.
think would be the best word to say it. And I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, to some extent you did, but just to clarify for the listeners, so there will be BFA actors who are in the acting track who do not take MT classes. There will be BFA actors who take MT classes, and then there will be non-majors who also are in the MT minor track as well. That should be a more unique, special cohort you're describing there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So yeah, we'll have people who come into the audition room like, I'm only auditioning for BFA.
Right.
People who come in and say, I'm only auditioning for the MT minor, and then people who say they're auditioning for both.
And the MT minor folks may be people who didn't originally audition at all. They could be auditioning as a sophomore theoretically. Or that
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a 15 to 16 load minor,
Yep.
and so you can theoretically get it accomplished within 3 years.
Yep.
But the perfect scenario, of course, is to maybe kind of know.
Yep.
But we've had some incredible success anecdotes about students who came here as a freshman, just as a BFA, and then said, "Oh my gosh, this program is
Mm-hmm.
great," or "I need this in my life," and they audition, at the end of their freshman year, beginning of sophomore, and then we can fit them in.
I love it. Okay, so I want to get into the specific curriculum, but first, just from a broad perspective, how much, like sort of from a percentage of your time, how much time am I spending as a BFA actor or BFA actor with MT minor, but how much percentage of my time am I spending in theater classes versus in non-theater classes? And for this sake, let's call it theater classes, also counting theater history or any of those academic classes. How much am I spending sort of in the major versus how much am I spending outside time doing other things?
It's a pretty standard kind of like 120 credit load over the course of the 4 years, where the students obviously need to have their general education courses. As a Research One university, they have to obviously take care of the gen eds. But it's all pretty well crafted, and it goes pretty specific, and then it starts to kind of like truncate, and then the electives start to open up.
Mm-hmm.
So some of our favorite students are the ones who come in saying like, yes, I want to be I want a BFA in acting, but I also am curious about costume design.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the middle of strategic planning right now, but our former kind of moniker was school of choice, basically meaning that we have almost 30 faculty members, and you have like almost like 5 different theaters in the round, in the
Mm-hmm.
outside, in the proscenium, in a thrust. And so we have a ton of opportunities for students to really kind of augment what they want. um, so so yeah, it's really kind of about the student and how they kind of stay curious the entire time to be able to manipulate their path forward, and we're willing to adjust with it because every single faculty member is also adjusting with the current state of the industry.
And how does that work with your students? I mean, how many of your students choose, to maybe get an additional minor, or even whether it's a minor, it's additional study in the costume design of it all, versus how many get, sort of non-theater minors? You have a lot of students getting academic minors, any academic double majors. How does that work if you're interested outside of the theater program too?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the cool things about MSU is that we have kind of like we have flat rate tuition, right? So what it means is basically, as long as you're in the 12 to 18 credits, you are going to pay for a flat rate. So if you take less classes, as long as it's not beneath 12, you're the same tuition. And once that was implemented a handful of years ago, students started to say, "Oh, well, I can take significantly more as long as
Mm-hmm.
I can handle it in my work-life balance." So you actually find a lot of double majors. You
Mm-hmm.
find a lot of double minors. I've had students who are BFA actors, dance minors, and musical theater minors at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. We also have a really robust arts and cultural management minor, which a lot of students want to take, especially if they have an eye for more kind of entrepreneurialism, like kind of like building their own theater programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of ways to really manipulate it. And it's our job really through recruitment to make sure that everybody has as much visibility as possible. I'm sure that an average student coming in, when they're looking at this, is like too many choices,
Mm-hmm.
but it makes sense for the faculty that we have and the resources that we have.
And then what about for the BFA actors who don't get the MT minor? Are they getting anything additional without the like? Is there additional acting classes, or are the MT minors taking all the BFA acting classes plus an additional MT
Yeah,
minor?
so the BFA actors without an MT, they obviously have our kind of like sorted out BFA acting program. But their electives can change. And sometimes we create additional MT courses that can be populated by people who don't have the minor. For example, last year we created a Sondheim scene study course. We created a musical history and kind of cultural performance course. And so we have these ancillary courses that can sometimes be taken by anybody. But the core of the work is basically 3 heavily acting focused musical theater courses, and then 5 credits ish in dance technique, and then 5
Mm-hmm.
credits ish in voice. And so that's a totally consumable and acceptable amount of course load for the people to fill out their space. But if they want to add electives, I've had students who are you know have double majors in psychology and in acting, and that
Mm-hmm.
becomes wildly exciting
Uh-huh.
because we have faculty who are really focused on psychology and introversion versus extroversion and things like that. So we're really malleable.
That's really cool. And with those 5 credits ish of dance, like what does that mean if we were to translate that into my schedule? Like, am I dancing every semester? Is it how many times a week? How many hours? What does that mean in terms of 5 credits?
Yeah, so a lot of the dance courses are 2 credits, and some of them are 3. And you can translate movement courses that are from your BFA into more dance. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I have a student who is a BFA actor and a MT minor, but she rediscovered her love for dance while she was here, and so she began to craft a way to to kind of cannibalize the movement courses that are inside of the BFA and use them and kind of double dip. So then
Mm-hmm.
she gave herself the opportunity to have more dance
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to movement. So we're really malleable again with how we can do it. So, however, if you were to break it down, that would be probably like 3 dance courses to fulfill your minor,
Mm-hmm.
and then 4 semesters of singular voice and one kind of group theory course,
Mm-hmm.
and then 3 semesters of the acting. So that typically happens somewhere around like their end of their sophomore year or the beginning of their junior year. So usually in their second or third year, sometimes in their fourth, they'll be focused primarily on acting, and then they'll sprinkle the dance whenever they need it, and then voice is a little bit more programmatic.
Totally makes sense. Let's talk a little about the senior year. So, how are you preparing your students for the launch into the business? From before senior year, but then also, especially as you're talking about industry connections and them sort of launching into the business. How do you prepare and help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, it's no, it's not any new knowledge that after COVID things change. We used to have an on-site New York showcase every year
Mm-hmm.
through Actors Connection, I think it was called. But we actually have 4 possible media acting courses plus film, green screen, VR, motion capture, and augmented reality classes now. So we have more media acting than probably, I don't want to assume, but probably than most other colleges
Mm-hmm.
inside of a theater department, because we have the faculty for it and we have the resources, and we're connected with another college called the College of Arts and Communications, which is one of the most highly funded colleges on campus, and they have massive studios and all of the equipment, and we're really working well together. So if you come in here, and that's why we changed it from BFA in acting to BFA in acting, film and new media,
Mm-hmm.
and because that really represents what we actually do. So we create really robust websites and reels with a ton of content.
Mm-hmm.
An average student who will graduate probably this year or in the next 2 years will not only have the possibility to be in films that go to festivals, but also a significant amount of acting on film, a significant amount of like really highly highly edited and qualified dance B-roll, as well as musical theater B-roll. And then if they are interested really highly in media at the same time, they could have them performing in a video game or with an avatar, et cetera, et cetera. So the amount of content that's tech oriented is
Mm-hmm.
pretty high comparatively. And so what we do as our showcase is really a hyper robust website that then gets kind of pushed out to various markets. We also do what's called an LA away and a Chicago away, where we take students to Chicago and trips to LA, and then we also have a London program where students who can sign up for that program can spend a majority of their summer in London
Cool.
working on things. So it's a little bit more kind of expansive as opportunities, without like a hyper codified, like, this is what you do your senior year. We are going to have a showcase.
I love it. Yeah, I definitely do not hear about augmented reality a lot. I'm sure maybe more in the coming years, but that's not every acting MT program has augmented reality as part of their training.
Pretty fun.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned some of this in terms of the size of the campus and the architecture, but just in terms of the experience of like campus life at MSU, what does that look like in terms of, you mentioned probably football games and those kind of things, but what is, I mean, in this large campus, what kind of do your students take advantage of?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's so huge. I mean, this place, it's wild. It takes up basically the entire city of East Lansing, and also because it started as an agricultural school. If you leave campus and you're only 5 minutes away from the capital, Lansing of Michigan, you would assume that it would be relatively metropolitan, but no, it is just fields upon fields upon fields upon
Mhm.
fields and forests and stuff like that around it, and then you have this massive campus. Um, and it's considered a walking campus. And so students who come here right away, unless they have parents who are within like a 10 to 20-mile radius, I think are required to live on campus for their first year. And then, of course, they can do what they want. But it is considered a walking campus because it is a giant park. You can't even imagine, there's multiple museums. There's always something going on. The art festival is about to start any day now. A lot of students live in dormitories or homes that are close to the auditorium, which is our massive, giant Gothic theater building that is dedicated only to the theater department, which has, you know, it has theater in the round. It has a proscenium, which we share with the opera. It has a small studio theater. And then out back, it has a 60-year-long outdoor community summer theater. And then across the road, we have a Class A roadhouse called Wharton Center, which has been around since '82, which is where all the Broadway shows come outside of Detroit to East Lansing.
I
So
love it.
there's more. Again, I'll just keep hitting that. It's just like the opportunities are endless.
Yeah. It's really cool. And just to talk a little bit about cost, it looks like our crack research team here came up with an in-state tuition of about $16,000. That's just in tuition, and then out-of-state is $43,000. So a pretty big difference between in-state and out-of-state. I'd love to hear just in general with scholarships in terms of how that works, of what most of your students end up paying, and then is there any negotiation between in-state and out-of-state in terms of those students who are coming, if you have students coming from out of state. So what's it look like for the in-state students in terms of what they could expect to actually pay sticker price from that 16K, and then for out-of-state students with the 43?
Yeah. So, in any given department, there's I've kind of like put it down to kind of three main things that you can expect out of like a university. And this is just my own thing that I created after 10 years of working here. It's like you can have like high quality facilities and a high quality campus, et cetera, access to things. You can have a really, really high quality, professionally working faculty, and then you can have money to offer to people so that like they will choose this school based on the fact that it will mitigate the cost. We have the first two. We have some of the best facilities around. We have access to a ton of tech. We have multiple Broadway faculty and published authors and people who are doing incredible stuff. And because of the Research One aspect of it, we never stop doing it. We don't do it and then we come and sit down and become teachers. It's constant. What we do not have currently is we do not have a strong scholarship opportunity for students. It is there are a handful of students who can mitigate the cost by a small percentage. And then there are a series of small kind of like help you out in your first year scholarships. But that is the one where we fall short as far as like opportunity.
Yep, totally makes sense. Does that mean then that most of your students end up coming from the Michigan area or becoming in-state tuition given that price difference?
Yeah, it just depends on the student. What's happened recently, because we've had a lot of more forward-facing kind of marketing and visibility over the last 10 years or so, and it became audition only. And with the Wharton Center collaborations that we have, which are many, we've over the last 5 years, we've been getting a significantly higher rate of students from out of state, especially places like Illinois and Texas and Florida, East Coast as well. So I can't really necessarily speak to why that is, aside from maybe just more visibility.
Yep.
But one thing I will say is that, like, if you look at how the two biggest, and I'm not referring to theater programs right now, I'm just referring to the universities themselves. If you look at like a map of the United States or the map of the world, you would see University of Michigan really has a strong hold on like people who go to U of M. Like the whole state would be, dark blue. But if you look at the world, you would see it significantly more about our green and white. We're much more of like an academic international institution. And so a lot of people will get to that position where they're like, my great grandfather went here, my grandfather went here.
Uh-huh.
So that's why they make that decision.
Totally makes sense. And then just they'd be more prepared to pay the higher tuition, even if they have strong academics. And there's not large academic scholarships or potentially need-based scholarships are available, or is that also more difficult?
Well, absolutely, especially if they're double majoring, especially if they're involved in, in other athletics or other scenarios. We've had students who have came here because of that, and then added on the musical theater minor. For example, I have some especially dancers who are came here through big scholarships when it came to like. Uh, Various dance teams associated with like high level sports. I forget even what it is because I'm not like a super big sports guy, but you know what I'm saying. It's like we're in the top tier when it comes
Division one, maybe?
to Division One. That's the
There
one.
we go.
So anyway, that's kind of where you might find that. But yeah,
Go
if
Spartans, I think it is, right?
that's the one.
Yeah.
So if somebody is coming here, it'll because it's out of a desperate need to do it, despite the big difference between out of state and in state.
Totally makes sense. I'd love to wrap this section with just, as we're just past May 1st, not too long ago, as people are making those final decisions, why do you find that students, if they're signing on the dotted line and saying, yes, I want to come to Michigan State, this feels like the perfect school for me, or if they end up deciding, you know what, it was between you and another school, I went in this other direction. Do you have a sense of why they end up choosing you and why they end up not choosing you?
Yeah, so I'll start with the not choosing. Typically, what most young people want is they know in their brain that they need a BFA in musical theater acting. And so what I tend to do when I'm talking with them is that we have a new musical laboratory which brings people from Broadway every single fall. It's happened for the last 11 years. And we, recently brought Joey Contreras. We've had Ryan Scott Oliver before. We have really big names that come in, and we do brand new musicals, and the students do 3 weeks of workshopping them. And then now they have like incredible Broadway contacts when they leave.
Mm-hmm.
We have a main stage musical, and we have a professional summer theater that does a musical in the summer. So if you are highly focused on musical theater, you can get 3 large musical productions a year, which is about the same as some other schools who have musical theater BFAs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a possibility. The students who do choose us, though, out of others, usually it's because during their time on campus, they've felt more at home in kind of a collegiate experience. They have a really large faculty that cares desperately about them, and they know that no matter what their focus point, there's going to be somebody that they can go to that is going to foster their intrigue and their curiosity about their, esoteric or idiosyncratic kind of thing where, it might be like lighting design and MT acting or
Mm-hmm.
dance and costume.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. All right, we're going to take a short break. And on the back end, we're going to dive a little bit into your audition and admission practices. So back in a flash. All right, we are back with Brad Willcuts, and we're going to talk a little bit about the audition and admission sort of factors for Michigan State University. I'd love to start with just like how are people auditioning for you? So, in terms of different locations, are they all coming to campus? It seems like you guys do not do pre-screen videos, right? But are you using video online auditions? How does that work in terms of how someone would encounter a Michigan State?
Yeah, so we basically have 3 rounds of it. The first round is simply for the students who are already on campus or transfer students who want to get in, re-audition for the BFA, re-audition for the MT minor. The second round is all for people who can't make it to campus.
Mm-hmm.
So it's and we use the platform Accepted, and we go through that with all 10 of our faculty, and we respond to all their videos, all of their and they can of course say, I want musical theater and BFA or just musical theater.
Mm-hmm.
And we respond to that. And then our third round of it, and this all happens around February. And then our third round is for people who can make it to campus, and we go through that process in person. So 2 in person, 1 digital.
But those are separate. It's not like a digital and then into the in-person. It's you're either doing the digital or you're doing the in-person as an audition.
Yeah.
I love it. So let's talk about then, what are you looking for in those auditions? As the 10 faculty are going through videos, or as you're meeting people in the in-person experience, what are you looking for that would make someone a yes candidate or a no candidate?
Yeah, so there's three of us hyper focused on musical theater, and then six other acting faculty who are focused on other various areas, and then we also have our dance only faculty. So an average student will come in doing a monologue or a song, and then we always have one of their monologues done on film,
Mm-hmm.
and it's live cast to a giant flat screen in front of us, so we can work on media just due to the nature of our program. So
Mm-hmm.
students are expected to be able to, within the moment, be able to be coached down into a cinematic audition as opposed to a live kind of
Mm-hmm.
theatrical audition. And we are looking for, obviously, some sort of semblance of knowledge of self, being able to switch a little bit during coaching. But in the end, one of the things that we find ourselves doing a lot is being inspired by people who, again, want to share their education with us, who are curious, who have interesting pursuits. You can tell that they are thirsty for knowledge. Um, Oftentimes, we will get to that point where we will really want to work with a person who wants to work with us, as opposed to, oh, they were able to hit a G sharp but the other person
Mm-hmm.
hit a G. That's not really in our bag. it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really about the person themselves. And so that's why that interview process that happens, if it's digital, it'll be like an explanation of self, but if it's in person, we really sit down and spend a lot of time being like, tell us what you do when you're not in a
Uh-huh.
musical theater production. Like, what other things interest you? Like, if you were to have another major, like, what would it be? So then we can start to get a better idea and kind of like mine into what kind of student they might be, because that's going to be the most kind of accessible and interesting pursuit based off the kind of work that we do at a R1.
And do you feel like you're kind of sussing out more of that, the more the personality based stuff of the
Yeah.
curiosity and what you're looking for? Are you sussing that out more in the interview, or are you doing that in the audition itself? The way they take adjustments, what they bring in material choice. Is it a combination, or is it more like, hey, I'm looking for the talent in this portion, and then with the interview is when I'm really going to focus on who they are?
Well, the BFA, I would say it's twofold. So, like in the MT area, if it gets to a point where, like, it really is showcased that they don't necessarily have a strong sense of musicality or rhythm or kind of tone acquisition, then that's difficult to kind of work with,
Mm-hmm.
because that means that we're starting from a different level. But if they have those kind of like this kind of bedrock basic musical foundation, then it gets hyper focused into the personality. The BFA is a little bit different. They look for a spark of being in your body, a spark of curiosity, of living in the moment. But I would say the Venn diagram is much more kind of moved over towards personality and
Mm-hmm.
interests and the person.
And then how much are you worried about things like academics? So first, how does it work with academic admission in terms of timing of, are they being admitted before you see them? Is that happening at the final stage with academics? And then how much does any of that factor in for you as you see their grades or SATs or essays or any of those kind of things? How does the academics relate to the artistic side of things?
Yeah, well, MSU has a very specific set of a GPA. It changes over time, and I think the SAT scores, as far as like percentage of value, like if you have a really high GPA but like a low SAT, or like vice versa, there is some wiggle room in that. I have advocated for certain students based off of their personality and their talent, and their story behind what's going on. And I have advocated for them to be pushed beyond if their academics aren't to the standard of
Mm-hmm.
MSU. But it is a relatively high GPA kind of like acceptance rate for MSU.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's around 3.4, 3.5.
Yep.
And then, but SATs aren't as specific anymore. In some of our sister colleges, it's more about the GPA, and then about the program itself, and kind of how many people they accept, and like kind of, does that is that merged with like one of the handful of scholarships that we can give, and then we make a justification for it.
And then I'd just love to talk about, like, what else are you thinking about as you're filling out your class? So are you conscious of stuff like the balance of gender, height, size, specifics of racial diversity, geographical balance? Do you think about anything else as you're putting together these 16 people?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're always concerned about trying to provide equitable opportunity. Um, but when it comes to just you know voice type or height or type, that really doesn't affect us whatsoever.
Hmm.
Our seasons are built and our classes are built with the expectation of malleability so that the curriculum can change based on the needs of the students. And so we do not have a cookie cutter process whatsoever. So if all of a sudden we're like, you know what, this feels like, and actually in 2021 we decided to do an entire season dedicated toward the topic of gender,
Hmm.
because we could. And so we, it's all it's. I guess I would say it like this: we care more about the why as opposed to the what.
Hmm.
Right? The how is what we do every single day,
Hmm.
but the why is really the most important factor. And if the students who are involved in our program have a really strong bedrock and why they want to pursue this, then we will augment our academics and our pursuit of their education with them.
I love it. All right. I know you have a heart out on respect, so I'll throw you the last question, which is just to talk to the parents in this process. So I'd love to hear, like, as you interact with parents who are kind of helping their child through this process, any advice of what you've seen works well or things to avoid in terms of how they can best support their children going through this?
Yeah, so I'll start with basically like the support system. Chances are that your child is most likely already involved in some sort of theater club or theater classes at their current educational level. And so, um, my advice would be to be a tiger, basically. Like, go out and get what you want. Like, if you want to have after school opportunities to try to find somebody, especially your theater teacher, to talk about what's the most efficient way or the most interesting way that I can create like a dichotomous audition, where it's like when we talk about contrasting, having somebody like help you find material. Sometimes an intellectual choice in contrasting material can be really interesting, and it can absolutely affect an academic behind the table. With respect to, so find those people, use your community, use your people to help practice that audition, have people coach them, especially those who are already embedded. The last thing I would say with reference to MSU is that, if your child is on the verge of deciding if they want to pursue a degree in MT or not, or you're having trouble deciding, come talk to us at MSU, because we have some incredible anecdotal history of students who needed musical theater in their life, but wanted to get a different degree rather than acting. And they had musical theater in their life almost just as much as
Hmm.
some of the other students, because of our performance opportunities, our student run shows, which are really robust as well. And so MSU is a great place for people who feel like they don't absolutely must, no matter what, have a BFA in MT. They could possibly find that balance with a focus on the future of what MT is in a research university.
I love it. All right. If people want to hear more information about Michigan State, do you recommend social media? You recommend websites? What's the best place for them to find out more if they want to get a little more information on you?
Yeah, so our website is pretty robust. It has a million different drop downs and opportunities for it. Theater at MSU, or msu.edu/theater. You can find a link towards the minor in musical theater, and you can see at the drop down all the way down at the bottom, you can see like 5 or 6 examples of the types of musicals that we do here. I've edited all those videos. Those are the ones that I've directed and choreographed in the past, and you can see that they are really high caliber. We also have a great advisor whose name is Amy Lampy, and she's all over the website. And we do tours all the time. We roll out the red carpet for people to have tours, to meet with students. You can visit classes anytime you want. And I'm always on the horn to be able to have a quick Zoom or phone call.
I love it. Thanks for the time today, Brad. It was so good getting to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks, Charlie. Take care.
Yes, yes, yes. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Bradley. And now, as we promised, we should promise a short intro and a short outro. I think we can do a short takeaway. I used to do like 3-minute takeaways. It used to actually happen back in the day. Let's see if I still have that tool in my toolkit. The big thing I noted down, it's really like a 2-part singular takeaway, is just the idea of these degree names and degree constructions, which we've talked about a bit, I think, a couple seasons ago on the pod. I think this is an interesting one in two ways with Michigan State, both in that idea of having the MT minor and the BFA being in acting, film, and new media. I think those are both kind of notable elements of it. You'll notice often for MTCA purposes when we're discussing schools or when we're listing like on social media or on our website, where people are going, we're often going to kind of colloquially pare down that degree to call it a degree in acting or a degree in musical theater, when they're actually often called all kinds of different things, not a singular way that it's referred to, right? This is mostly just due to ease and to try to avoid confusion in the many cases where there are a distinction or there is a distinction without a difference. That's often true. The difference between these names is not really a significant distinction, but I do think in plenty of cases, there can be a difference when you get into those specific paths of specialized degrees that are becoming more and more popular. There's kind of an arcane and I think not particularly interesting process that schools have to go through in like changing their names to actually be different things. You have to like do all this stuff with accreditation. You've heard schools talk about things like NAST, that's the National Association of the Schools of Theater. I don't think you need to worry too much about all that kind of stuff and how that works. I don't think that's particularly interesting. I'm always going to just point you back to looking at the curriculum and having that in-depth conversation with the schools when you're comparing different programs to each other and seeing how they actually differ. So, there's one program that might call itself a BFA in drama or theater with a concentration in acting versus a BFA in acting. And often I think those are just distinctions without a difference. And plenty of strong BFAs in acting that are only BFAs in acting or even BFAs in theater might have a lot of screen elements without being explicitly labeled a BFA in stage or screen, which now more and more are being explicitly labeled as a BFA in stage and screen or something like that, right? Or in this case, screen and new media, film and new media, right? This is getting more and more popular. I think even some programs are doing it without significant changes to the curriculum. They're just changing the degree name to match what had already become true in their curriculum. So in general, I wouldn't be overly concerned about the name. But of course, if you're interested in training on screen, if you see it directly in the name, you're going to have a bit more certitude that that's going to be a focus of the curriculum than you'll see if you just see a BFA in acting. Though again, most BFAs in acting in general should have some screen element to them. And I do like how Bradley talked about it in being part of their audition process, that they are explicitly looking for actors who are able to pare down their work to a filmic quality. That's not something you hear from all professors. That's something that they're actively looking for, right? We've talked before on the pod about my potentially biased opinion that like acting is acting from a broad scale point of view when we talk about training, and that in general, I think those additional techniques can be learned on top of the foundation of acting, even if they aren't necessarily present in the first year or two of training, right? But I do admit this is my bias and not necessarily the only opinion out there when it comes to studying film acting, right? Certainly the work that you do on camera and in self-tapes is going to be fundamentally different than the work that you're going to do live in the room, right? I think it should still come from that same root of truth, but I would never say that they're the same output when it's coming from a self-tape versus a live audition. So I do think it's exciting to see as these programs continue to grow and innovate, and in often cases just make more explicit what is obvious in 2025, which is that a large percentage of work that you're going to do, even as a live theater actor and a live musical theater actor, will have some camera elements to it if it starts with a self-tape, which in a lot of these cases, your audition may start with a self-tape. And I think the other part of the degree name, which is just worth mentioning, is just that idea of the MT minor, which I think Bradley was really helpful and clear in what that means for students who are interested in being professional actors versus musical theater actors only, right? You got a sense in those 16 credits of how much MT is required as part of the minor. And then you heard here in a different number of schools, the ways that could be potentially supplemented and added to in doing more musical theater, if that's something you're interested in. But that just, there is a significant difference between a BFA in acting, or in this case, a BFA in acting, film, and new media, with an MT minor versus a BFA in musical theater at a different school. However, and this is why I try to relate these two takeaways together, I think it's worth noting, and it's not always intuitive, there are some degrees that do say things like BFA in drama or BFA in theater performance, whatever it is, with a concentration in musical theater, which those ones can actually look identical to a BFA in musical theater at other places when you compare curriculum. Is that confusing enough for you, right? For instance, Carnegie Mellon offers a BFA in drama with a concentration in acting or a concentration in musical theater, but it looks a lot like degrees, which will directly call themselves a BFA in acting or BFA in musical theater. And if you don't look closely, you might never know that those two things are going on. You might not even realize as you're applying that you're applying to all these different degrees with their names. And I don't think it's intuitive, honestly, that a concentration can mean that it is really just like a musical theater degree, whereas an MT minor is going to tend to be less musical theater intensive than a comparable musical theater program. Again, there's no black and white rules. So as soon as I say this is true of MT minors and this is true of concentrations, it doesn't necessarily apply to all schools across the board. When in doubt, again, you go back to that curriculum and see what you're getting in those areas. But I think helpful just as you're navigating these degrees and going, what? Is my daughter applying to like 16 different degrees out of 20 schools? Maybe not quite that many, but yeah, often it's a number of different degrees when you're applying to musical theater and acting programs. Okay, that was pretty good at being short, right? Not 3 minutes, but still pretty good, pretty good. Also pretty good are our wonderful producers, Kelly Prendergast and Meghan Cordier, with our social media work by Jordan Rice. You know you can follow us at Mapping the College Audition and leave us ratings, reviews, comments, subscriptions, whatever you got, wherever you find your podcasts, whether you choose to listen or to watch and listen. And of course, you can check us out at MTCA.com for truly anything you need from an individual college prep perspective. To my young artists out there mapping their journeys, trust that you are enough for the right program, whatever its degree name is, exactly as you are right now. Now keep striving. We'll catch you next week.